It happened on a Sunday afternoon, one of those slow, shapeless days when time feels heavier than it should. Daniel had been cleaning out his phone, deleting apps, clearing photos, trying to make space for something new he couldn't quite name. That's when he saw her name again. Emma. He hadn't thought of her in a while, or at least, not in the kind of way that used to leave him sleepless. It had been 4 years since their last message, and still, there it was. The thread that had survived every software update, every new number, every quiet attempt to move on. For a long moment, he just stared at the screen. The last message was his, a single unread "Take care." She had never replied. Maybe she didn't see it, or maybe she saw it too late. Either way, it had stayed there like a period at the end of a sentence neither of them knew how to finish. He opened the conversation. The phone seemed to hesitate for a moment, loading thousands of messages. And suddenly, the years peeled back like pages. The text scrolled up, lazy jokes, late-night arguments, those endless threads that meant everything once and now belonged to another life. There was one about her dog getting sick, one where he tried to comfort her with terrible memes. Then one from her that said simply, "Don't fix it, just listen." He remembered how that message had hit him then. An argument in the middle of a Tuesday, her frustration with his silence. Back then, it had felt like criticism. Now it just sounded like truth. He kept scrolling. There was something oddly gentle in the way her words appeared, as if she was still there, quietly talking from another time. He realized he'd forgotten the sound of her laugh, but not the rhythm of her typing. She had always used 3 dots before a thought, like she was weighing her words. "I don't know if we're okay, but I hope we will be." The message blinked on his screen again, for years old, but suddenly alive. Daniel laughed, softly, unexpectedly. Not the bitter kind of laugh he used to give when her name came up, but something looser, easier. He remembered how hard they had tried, both of them too young to understand that love sometimes needs less noise. He wasn't angry anymore, not even sad. What surprised him most was the warmth, the quiet gratitude that they had existed at all. He scrolled back to the very first message. "Hey, it's Emma. I think I left my notebook at your place." A simple text that had somehow started everything. He leaned back in his chair, phone still in his hand, and felt the silence of his apartment fill with something different, not loneliness, but presence. He thought about how people carry each other in small ways, in playlists, in inside jokes, in photos they never delete. He realized that keeping her messages wasn't holding on to the past. It was just remembering the parts of himself that had mattered then. For the first time in years, he opened a new message window and typed her name. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. He wasn't sure what he wanted to say. Apologies felt wrong. Too late, too heavy. Nostalgia felt dishonest. But gratitude, that felt right. So he wrote, "Hi. I know it's been a while. I just wanted to say thank you." He stared at the words for a full minute, rereading them, as if testing their weight. Thank you for what? For teaching him patience? For making him braver? For leaving when it was time? Maybe all of it. He almost laughed again, realizing he didn't need to explain it. Some messages didn't have to make sense to anyone else. They were simply small pieces of closure. He pressed send. For a moment, the tiny screen light reflected in his eyes, blue, trembling. He half expected an error message, or no response at all. And yet, there was something freeing in that too. He put the phone down beside him and looked out the window. The light was fading, soft and gold, the kind that makes even an empty room feel alive. He hadn't realized how quiet his world had become until now. Minutes passed. Then the phone buzzed. His heart jumped, an involuntary, stupid reflex, like muscle memory. He glanced at the screen. A new message. Just one line. For what? He stared at it, smiling before he even realized it. The question wasn't cold, just curious. Almost amused. Like the kind of tone she used to have when she wanted him to explain something simple, like why he was late or why he couldn't pick a movie. For what? He typed, then deleted, then typed again. Finally, he sent. For trying. For being real. For everything we never said. There was no typing bubble this time. No dots. Just stillness. And somehow that was enough. He set the phone down, closed his eyes, and felt the strange, quiet peace of something ending exactly how it should have. The past hadn't vanished. It had just changed shape. And in that moment, he understood. Moving on wasn't forgetting. It was learning to look back and smile. When the phone buzzed again 10 minutes later, he didn't rush to read it. He just let it sit there, glowing faintly beside him, like a soft reminder that sometimes the right words find their way through, even after years of silence. The next morning felt different, though nothing had really changed. The air was cooler, the light sharper, like the world had taken a quiet breath overnight. Daniel woke early, too early for a Sunday, and sat on the edge of his bed for a long time, his phone still on the nightstand. He hadn't checked the message yet. Maybe he didn't want to ruin the simplicity of the night before. There was a strange comfort in not knowing. But eventually, curiosity won. He reached for the phone and unlocked it. The screen glowed to life, and there it was, a new message from Emma. "I didn't expect to hear from you. I thought you'd forgotten." He read it twice, maybe 3 times. There was no bitterness in it, no hidden tone, just honesty. He smiled. People rarely said things that plain anymore. He typed back, "I didn't forget. I just didn't know how to say hello again." Her reply came quicker than he expected. "You always overthink the simple things." He laughed quietly, shaking his head. Some things really never changed. They began to talk, not like they used to, not with that wild, restless energy of 2 people trying to make something last, but with a slow, patient rhythm, a kind of gentleness that only time could teach. She told him about her new city, how she'd started painting again, how she finally adopted another dog. He told her about his apartment, his sister's wedding, the book he'd been pretending to write for years. The conversation stretched through the morning, weaving through the ordinary. No grand confessions, no what-ifs, just small, human moments. At one point, she wrote, "You know, I found one of your old notes in a box last month. The one where you said, 'We'll figure it out.'" He stared at that message for a long time, then replied, "Did we?" A pause. Then, "Maybe not then, but maybe now we know what it meant." He didn't know what to say to that. There was a quiet truth in her words, the kind that didn't need an answer. He set the phone down and went to make coffee, the kind of simple ritual that used to feel dull, but now seemed like a small act of gratitude. Steam rose from the cup, curling through the morning light, and he thought about how strange it was, the way people drift in and out of your life, leaving fingerprints you can't wash away even when you try. He wasn't sure what they were now. Friends, maybe, or just 2 people who finally stopped running from the past. But it didn't matter. For once, there was no ache attached to her name. No unfinished business. Just the quiet relief of understanding. Later, as the day slipped into afternoon, he got another message from her. "It's weird, talking like this again. But it feels good. Like we left a window open somewhere." He smiled at that. "Yeah," he wrote, "maybe we did." He sent it and closed his eyes for a moment, imagining her on the other side of the screen, somewhere miles away, sitting in her own quiet room, sunlight on her face. Maybe she was smiling too. There was something beautiful in that, the idea that closure didn't have to mean silence, that sometimes healing could sound like a conversation starting over, softer this time. When he looked out the window again, the sky was the color of late afternoon, gold fading into pale blue. He thought about how, for years, he had tried to forget her, to erase her name, her number, her ghost from his life. And now, all it took was a simple message to realize that forgetting wasn't the goal. Remembering without pain was. That night, before he went to bed, he scrolled up through their new thread, small messages, short, calm, real. At the very top, his first words from yesterday stared back at him. "Hi. I just wanted to say thank you." He smiled and locked his phone. Some things didn't need endings. They just needed time. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of their new connection settled into something gentle, unhurried. They didn't speak every day. Sometimes a week would pass before one of them reached out. But there was an unspoken understanding that the silence between them wasn't emptiness anymore. It was space. One evening, Daniel came home after a long day, dropped his keys on the counter, and noticed a new message waiting. "Do you ever think about that trip we never took?" He smiled instantly. "Which one?" he typed back. "The one to the coast. You said we'd rent a car, get lost somewhere near the ocean, and never come back." He remembered it vividly. The plan they'd made one night over cheap wine and loud laughter. Back when love felt like something that could save them from everything. "Yeah," he wrote. "I think about it sometimes." She replied, "Me too. I guess we did get lost, just not together." That one hit him in the chest, but it wasn't the kind of hurt that lingered. It was soft, like remembering a song that once meant something. He stared at the screen for a moment before typing. Maybe it's not too late for the drive. Just not the never coming back part. There was a long pause before she answered. Maybe one day. And for the first time in years, one day didn't sound like a lie. A few days later, they met. Accidentally at first. Or maybe not so accidentally. She was in town visiting her parents and suggested coffee. If you're free, no pressure. He almost said no. Not because he didn't want to see her, but because he feared what seeing her might stir up. But curiosity won again. The cafe was quiet, filled with the hum of conversations and the smell of roasted beans. When she walked in, time didn't stop like in the movies. It just softened. She looked older, of course, but in a good way. There was something steadier about her now. He stood, unsure whether to hug her or just smile, and she solved it by wrapping her arms around him first. It wasn't romantic. It was human, familiar. They talked for hours, the way people do when they've already said all the important things in life and are just grateful for what's left. She told him about her small apartment near the park, about teaching art classes for kids, about how she still burned toast every morning. He told her about his new job, his niece's endless questions, his latest failed attempt at keeping a houseplant alive. They laughed about how serious they used to be, how dramatic every argument felt. We really thought love was supposed to be chaos, she said. Maybe that's why it didn't work. He nodded. Maybe it was supposed to teach us something, not last forever. She looked at him quietly, and he knew she agreed. When they finally stepped outside, the sky was painted in late spring colors, soft orange fading into violet. The street was warm, alive, and she turned to him before leaving. I'm glad we talked, she said. Me too. She smiled, that same half-smile he'd once known by heart. Take care of yourself, okay? He hesitated, then said, You too, Em. It was simple. No promises. No nostalgia. Just closure that didn't feel like an ending. That night, he walked home through streets he'd walked 1,000 times, but everything looked new. Maybe it was him who'd changed. Maybe, after all these years, he'd finally stopped carrying the weight of what could have been. He got home, kicked off his shoes, and opened his phone again. Their chat was still open, the last message from her unread. Thank you for reaching out that day. It meant more than you think. He read it twice, then set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the faint sound of rain beginning outside. For the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, of everything said, everything forgiven. Weeks passed. They stayed in touch, sometimes talking about random things, books, recipes, songs they'd rediscovered. It was easy, natural. She once texted him late at night. You know, I don't regret us anymore. He smiled at the screen and replied, Me neither. And it was true. Regret had no place here. They had hurt each other, yes, but they had also made each other better, even if it took years to see it. He realized something profound in that moment. Not all love stories end in togetherness, but the good ones always leave you changed. Summer arrived, and one warm evening, he drove out to the old overlook by the lake, the place they used to go when they needed to think. The air smelled of pine and rain. He sat on the hood of his car, phone in hand, scrolling through their conversation one last time. Not to cling to it, but to honor it. He thought about how strange it was that something as small as a message, just a few words on a screen, could reopen a door he thought was locked forever. Not to the past, but to peace. He typed one final message, not knowing if he'd even send it. You once said we got lost. Maybe this is us finding our way back, not to each other, but to who we were supposed to be. He hesitated, then hit send. The message delivered, no typing bubbles followed. And that was okay. He leaned back, watching the sun sink behind the trees, painting the lake in soft gold. Somewhere far away, she might be watching the same sky. Maybe she'd smile when she read it. Maybe she'd just tuck it away quietly, like a good memory. As the last light faded, Daniel felt something settle in his chest, a calm he hadn't known in years. He realized the story between them didn't need an ending. It already had one, and it was this. Two people who once loved each other enough to break, now learning to be grateful instead of sad. The kind of ending that didn't ask for forever, just honesty. He started the car, rolled down the windows, and let the night air wash over him. Somewhere between the road and the horizon, he finally understood, some messages aren't meant to be deleted. They're meant to remind you that love, even when it's over, can still be kind. Autumn came quietly, the kind of season that didn't announce itself with storms, but with a slow change in the air. The mornings grew crisp, the evenings shorter, and Daniel found himself walking more, long, aimless walks through the park, past trees shedding their colors one by one. Sometimes he caught himself thinking of her during these walks, not with longing, but with a kind of calm remembrance. They still texted now and then. Nothing deep, nothing that threatened to reopen the past. Just the occasional, "You'd love this song." Or, "Guess what? I finally learned to make coffee without burning it." It was strange how easy it had become, how time had turned something once sharp into something soft. One Saturday afternoon, he received a message from her that simply said, "You still write?" He paused, then smiled. "Not really. Haven't had much to say." A few minutes later, she replied, "Maybe now you do." That message lingered with him all day, echoing in the back of his mind. That night, he sat at his desk, the same one that had gathered dust for years, and opened a blank document. The words came slowly at first, hesitant, but soon they began to flow, fragments of memory, reflections, moments that had never made sense until now. He wrote about her laugh, about the small scar on her wrist, about how silence between them used to feel like punishment, but now felt like peace. He didn't know if it was a story or just a confession to himself. But when he finished, he felt lighter. For the first time, he didn't write to forget. He wrote to remember kindly. A week later, he sent her a message. "I started writing again. You were right." She replied almost immediately. "You always needed a little push." Then another. "Can I read it someday?" He hesitated, then answered, "Maybe. It's not really about us." Her response came after a pause. "That's exactly why I want to." Months passed like that, a quiet friendship stitched together through simple words. They became each other's gentle witness to life. Never intrusive, always present in small ways. He learned that she was seeing someone, a man she'd met through her art classes. She mentioned it casually, almost nervously, as if expecting a reaction. But all he said was, "I'm glad. You deserve good things." And he meant it. After they hung up, he sat there for a long time, realizing how far they had both come. The ache was gone. All that remained was gratitude. One night, she sent him a photo, a painting she'd done of a road disappearing into a pale horizon. Beneath it, a message. "Remember when we said we'd drive until we ran out of road?" He stared at it for a long time, then typed, "Looks like you found the road after all." "Maybe," she wrote back. "But you were part of the map." That line stayed with him. It was the kind of thing that didn't need a reply. Just acknowledgement. Just silence. Winter came, and they talked less. Not because of distance, but because there was no longer a need to hold on so tightly. People drift, even in peace. One evening, as snow fell outside his window, he scrolled through their messages one last time. So much had changed, and yet every line still carried warmth. He thought about deleting the thread, starting fresh, but stopped himself. Not out of sentimentality, but respect. Some things deserve to stay, not because they hurt, but because they once healed. He put the phone away, poured himself a glass of wine, and watched the snow settle on the streets below. Somewhere in that quiet, he realized this was the true ending. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just real. The kind of ending that happens not in a moment, but gradually, like snow melting in spring. Days turned into months, and their conversations faded naturally, like the closing of a gentle chapter. Occasionally, she'd like one of his posts, or he'd comment on one of her paintings, and that was enough. They didn't need words anymore. The connection had transformed into something quieter, but no less meaningful. On a late spring morning, he received a letter in the mail, an actual letter, handwritten, her familiar slant filling the page. Inside, she thanked him for reaching out that day, for reminding her that kindness could survive endings, for showing her that love didn't always have to vanish to make room for peace. At the bottom, she'd written, "We may not have been forever, but we were enough." He folded the letter carefully, placed it in the drawer where he kept things that mattered, a photo of his parents, an old ticket stub, now her note. That evening, he went for a walk again, the city golden under the sunset. He stopped by the lake, where the air smelled faintly of spring rain, and watched ripples form on the surface. He took out his phone, looked at their old thread, and finally whispered to himself, "Thank you." It wasn't sadness. It was gratitude, the rare kind that came when you stopped wishing for more and started cherishing what was. When he went home, he opened his notebook and began to write again, not about her, but about finding peace after losing something beautiful. The words came easier this time. They weren't about the past anymore. They were about the person he'd become because of it. And in that moment, he understood that every message they had shared, every silence they had endured, every memory they had released, had all led to this quiet, full-hearted peace. Some love stories don't end with reunion. Some end with understanding. And sometimes, that's the happiest ending of all. Spring deepened into summer, and with it came a lightness Daniel hadn't felt in years. The city was alive again, windows open, laughter spilling out of cafes, the scent of lilacs drifting through the air. He spent his days working, reading, meeting friends, living without the constant pull of memory. Yet every now and then, her name would flicker on his phone screen, a message, a photo, a song recommendation, and each time, it felt like a quiet reminder that the past could exist gently in the present. One morning, while scrolling through his emails, he noticed one with her name in the sender line. The subject read, "That story you were writing." He opened it. Inside was a short note. "You once said it wasn't about us. Maybe it never was. But I'd still like to read it, if you're ready." He smiled. He hadn't touched the story in months, though he'd thought about it often. It wasn't perfect, maybe never would be, but it carried truth. He replied, "Give me a few days. I think it's time." That evening, he reread it, every page filled with fragments of who they'd been and who they'd become. It wasn't a love story. It was a story about growing up, about learning how to hold joy without fear of losing it. When he finished editing, he attached the file to an email and typed, "Here it is. No promises that it's good, but it's honest." Then he hit send. For 2 days, there was no reply. He didn't worry. He knew her silence didn't mean disinterest, it meant care. When the message finally came, it was short. "I cried, but not in the way I used to. Thank you for writing this. It's beautiful." That single line meant more than any review, any applause. It was the quiet validation that sometimes healing wasn't just personal, it was shared. He sat back, smiling faintly, and for the first time, felt the urge to write again. Not about her, not about loss, but about beginnings. Weeks later, she texted him a photo of her new art exhibit. Bright, vivid pieces filled with light. Beneath it, a caption, "You were right. Peace can be colorful." He stared at it for a long time, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Looks like you found your forever," he wrote. "Not forever," she replied. "Just now. And that's enough." It struck him how complete that sounded. Not final, but whole. He realized they had both found what they were searching for, not in each other, but because of each other. That summer, Daniel finally took the drive to the coast they had once dreamed about. He went alone, not out of loneliness, but curiosity, to see if the road still felt endless, if the ocean still felt like freedom. The drive was long and quiet, the radio humming songs he didn't know. When he reached the shoreline, the sky was silver, the waves soft. He walked barefoot along the wet sand, the wind tugging at his shirt, and thought about how strange it was that some promises could take years to keep. He didn't need anyone beside him this time. The moment was already full. As the sun began to set, he sat on a driftwood log and took out his phone. There were no new messages, no missed calls, just the steady rhythm of the sea. He scrolled back through their conversation, the first message he'd sent her months ago. "Hi. I just wanted to say thank you." It was still there, still simple, still true. He thought about deleting it, closing that small circle for good, but he couldn't bring himself to. Not because he was holding on, but because some stories deserved to remain visible, a testament to what forgiveness could look like. He opened his notes app and typed a single line. Maybe the bravest thing love can do is end gently. Then he saved it and slipped his phone back into his pocket. The sky turned gold and then deep blue, the tide rising slowly, whispering against the shore. Somewhere, he imagined, she might be painting, laughing, living her own version of peace. They didn't need to speak anymore. What they'd said, and left unsaid, was enough. Months later, as summer faded again, Daniel self-published his collection of short stories. He titled it, "Messages We Never Delete." He didn't expect anyone to read it, not really. It was more of a promise to himself, to keep telling the truth, to keep noticing beauty where once there was pain. But one evening, he received a message from her. "I saw your book." The title made me smile. "You did it." He typed back. "We both did, in our own ways." That night, he placed a single copy of the book on his nightstand, right next to the letter she had sent months before. The two sat side by side like quiet companions, the past and the present coexisting peacefully. Before turning off the light, he glanced out the window. The city pulsed softly in the distance, alive, forgiving. He thought about how far he had come, how much they had changed each other, and how not every story needed a perfect ending, just one that felt true. He lay back, eyes closing, the last thought drifting through his mind like a whisper. Maybe some connections aren't meant to fade, only to transform. Maybe love, once real, never really disappears. It just changes shape, becoming something you carry with you, something that quietly reminds you to be kind. And as sleep began to pull him under, Daniel smiled, because after all this time, after all the messages, silences, and years, he finally understood that letting go didn't mean losing. Sometimes, it simply meant learning how to keep the good parts. Autumn returned again, the second since that message, and Daniel found himself in a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. He woke early, brewed coffee, wrote for a few hours, then walked through the park with its amber leaves crunching beneath his shoes. The world no longer carried the heaviness it once did. It felt balanced, even kind. His book had quietly found readers. Messages from strangers arrived, thanking him for the words, for the way he'd written about love without bitterness. Each one reminded him how something deeply personal could somehow belong to everyone. One afternoon, as he was preparing notes for a reading event, a familiar name appeared in his inbox. It was her. The subject line read, "Thought you should see this." Inside was a photo of a gallery wall. Hanging there, between two vivid blue canvases, was one of her paintings, a road stretching toward an open sky. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Inspired by a message I once received." He stared at it for a long time, a slow smile spreading across his face. That single photo carried more meaning than any conversation could. Without overthinking, he replied, "It's beautiful. I'm glad it found its place." She answered later that evening, "We both did. Nothing more, nothing less. Just enough." Weeks later, during the first chill of November, he had his reading. It wasn't a big event, just a small independent bookstore tucked on a quiet street, the kind of place where stories felt at home. When he read the last story of the night, the one about two people who reconnected through old messages, the room fell into that soft silence that means people are listening not just with their ears, but with something deeper. Afterward, people came up to talk, to say thank you, to share fragments of their own lives. And then, as the crowd thinned, he saw her. She stood near the door, coat buttoned, hair slightly damp from the rain outside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she smiled. "You read it better than I imagined." He chuckled quietly. "I didn't think you'd come." She shrugged. "I wasn't sure I would. But then I remembered how it started, all because of a message you never deleted." He nodded, his heart full but calm. "It's funny, isn't it? The things that stay." She looked around the small shop, the smell of old paper and coffee floating in the air. Maybe that's what love really is, what stays after it stops needing to. They talked for a while, walking slowly outside into the soft drizzle. The city lights blurred in the wet streets, turning everything gold and hazy. "I'm happy for you," she said finally. "You found something real in all of it." He smiled. "We both did." A long pause followed, comfortable, the kind only two people who've made peace can share. She looked up at him, her eyes bright in the rain. "So this is it?" she asked, not sadly but with quiet acceptance. He thought for a moment before replying. "Maybe not it. Maybe just enough." She nodded, then reached out and briefly squeezed his hand, an old habit, one that once meant love and now simply meant connection. Then she turned, crossing the street without looking back, her figure disappearing into the rhythm of the city. Daniel stood there for a while, watching her fade into the distance. There was no ache this time, only a steady warmth. He realized that closure doesn't always come like a door slamming shut. Sometimes, it's a door left slightly open, letting in just enough light to see things clearly. When he finally walked home, the rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and cool. He unlocked his apartment, set down his keys, and noticed the book she'd signed at the event. His book, in her hands for the first time. She'd written inside the cover, "For Daniel," for the words we never said, but somehow still wrote. He closed it gently, set it on his desk, and sat by the window, watching the night stretch across the city. In that quiet moment, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. For every wrong turn, every silence, every message that once stung and now soothed. He picked up his phone and scrolled through their old thread one last time. It was still there, months of words, of healing. He thought about deleting it, not because he wanted to forget, but because it no longer needed to exist as a reminder. It had already done its work. After a long pause, he pressed and held the conversation. The screen asked, "Delete this thread?" He smiled faintly and whispered, "Thank you," before finally pressing delete. The phone went dark. Strangely, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like letting go of something that had already been set free. That night, he slept deeply, dreaming not of her, but of the sea, the same one he had once visited alone, now brighter, calmer. When he woke, sunlight spilled across his room, warm and quiet. He brewed coffee and opened a fresh page in his notebook. The words came easily this time. Not about endings or memories, but about beginnings, the kind that didn't erase the past, but built gently on top of it. As he wrote, he realized that some stories never really end. They just become part of who you are. Theirs had begun with pain and ended in peace, a full circle drawn not with regret, but with gratitude. And somewhere out there, he knew, she was probably painting again, adding light where there used to be shadow. That thought made him smile. Love, he decided, didn't have to be forever to mean forever. It just had to be real, once. And that was more than enough.